Larry Jasinski is the CEO of Argo Medical Technologies in Boston, Massachusetts. Argo Medical is the developer of the ReWalk exoskeleton. The ReWalk was invented by Israeli entrepreneur Dr. Amit Goffer, who was inspired to create an exoskeleton device and start Argo Medical Technologies after becoming quadriplegic himself in 1998. Since Dr. Goffer founded Argo in 2001, it has become an international company with headquarters in the US, Germany, and Israel. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Larry Jasinski, who will give us some insight into this rapidly emerging medical field of exoskeleton technology.
First, the earlier work that I've gotten to see, that is just fabulous, and it's great to be able to bring something else from Israel to present. Most of the time when I'm presenting, by the nature of what I do on the application side, I get to talk to finance people, regulatory people, and reimbursement people. What I'd really like to do is spend more time talking to more clinically oriented groups, and in particular people with spinal cord injuries, and I hope that that's the direction we get to over time. First, this picture is, I've been a part of about 40 medical devices over the course of my career, and this is one of the ones where I've gotten to know the individuals remarkably well, and you don't get that with implants and other things. But if you looked at these 5 individuals up there, one, it's great to see them walking down the hallway together. All of them are completely paralyzed. The guy on the far left, Ian, was in Afghanistan, and Jeep he was in was hit by a bomb, and he wound up injured all the way up at T4, so a high level of injury. The guy next to him is a firefighter in New York City, fell through the floor on the 2nd floor, landed on the 1st. Third one, 9/11 site, working on it. A crane with 6 tons of steel landed on the trailer he was inside. And one of the things that his life has changed, he can stand up again, he can walk with his kids. He likes to cook, he likes to stand because he can do a better job with it. The 4th guy is a Marine, and his story is one of the more interesting ones to me. I'm a runner, so I listen to some of these things. He ran the Marine Corps Marathon, did pretty well, ran a good time, was injured. He won the Marine Corps Marathon in a wheelchair about 5 years later, and his goal is to do the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, D.C., wearing our exoskeleton suit in the coming couple of years. And then the last guy is a police officer, a gentleman who was shot. All these applications, every one of them has a story, and there's parts to each one that's particularly important. Now, my intent here today is not entirely to represent ReWalk, it's to represent an industry. ReWalk's the leader, ReWalk's the one that started it with Dr. Goffer. But what we can offer to people that are injured is remarkable. So my objectives, whether it's our company or anyone else that's working in the same space, is to talk a little bit about the impact of spinal cord injuries. As much as we all specialize in one area, you realize how deep it is as you look at it closer. Talk about some of the technologies, really give you some of the thoughts we had behind designing it, which will help, and then the current state of development. So, spinal cord injury, this is just the US, the numbers are about the same for Europe. I don't have any numbers for Asia, but there's about 11,000 cases a year in the US, about 260,000 that live with it on a day-to-day basis, and it's mostly a male dominated, and the age is young, 16 to 30 at the age of injury is the average. Leading causes, motor vehicle, military, falls, violence, and sports. Now, what we treat right now is the lower part, the paraplegia, as you can see up there on the screen, any injury from T1 or below. But Dr. Goffer himself is quadriplegic or tetraplegic. His injuries at C2. We do have a device that'll begin clinical work on that soon, and it is an area that there's one other company also advancing. So these are areas that are going to advance for these types of individuals. As I said, I've been in a lot of medical devices. How do I explain this one? It's an old quote, but it was one of the better ones I could find. This is from Dr. Richard Allen Asher from 1947. The pathetic, paralyzed patient lying long in a bed. Urine leaking from his descended bladder. Lime leaking from his bones. Blood clotting in his veins. Flesh rotting from his seat. Scabella stacking up in his colon, and the spirit draining from his soul. is you're trying to understand what this does when you're sitting in a chair day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. You could start to look at the impact in a lot of medical ways. The deconditioning that happens to the body from immobility. The number one cause of death of individuals from spinal cord injury is urinary tract infection. Bone loss and fractures, measured, I'll give you some measurements for it, routine. DVT, clots in the lower veins, pressure ulcers. That's what killed Christopher Reeve, which is someone who was very prominent in this space. The constipation issues in terms of quality of life, it's one of the things we hear the most about from the people who are now using this. And then what it means just on a lifestyle depression side. Now, what are secondary medical consequences? Problems with the bowel, osteoporosis, loss of lean tissue, gain in fat, problems with insulin, diabetes is highly prevalent in this group, and heart disease. So given a little bit of each, the difficulty of going to the bathroom is very common, and the amount of medication, enemas, suppositories, and manual extraction is very, very high. It's time consuming. It's hours for many people on a daily basis. Here's one piece of data. Smart pill is something you can measure how quickly something passes through the system. So for an average person, an N of 10, it takes about 1 day, plus or minus about 7 hours. For a spinal cord injury, it takes 3.3 days, plus or minus 2.5 days. If you look at osteoporosis, it's a non-weight bearing condition. You can see what pictures of what may happen to the bone here over to the right, and you try to preserve that as much as you can, but it continues to be lost year over year. If you think of lean tissue, now in these graphs you see the dotted lines to the top, that is normal basically, and then the lines that you see in gray in the circle and the black, that is paraplegia and quadriplegia. But if you look in the upper left, total body lean, you can see how much is lost over the course of time. And same thing in the arms, the paraplegic gains some arm strength because they tend to move themselves around a lot. But if you look at any of these, upper left being lean, arm on the right, and then the bottom left being the trunk and the leg, you see what's happening since the injury in the months that go out. They just rapidly, body is changing from the lack of activity, and it has a significant impact on the function of the body. This was a very interesting study. It was done by Ann Spungen, doctor out of the Bronx, who I've gotten to know very well and tend to read all of her stuff. But if you look, she took twins, one who was spinal cord injured and one who was not, and looked at what happened to their bodies. Again, the dotted line at the top of this slide is normal, and this is the amount of lean tissue loss over, this goes out to almost 30 years. So losing an average of almost 8 kilograms per decade of injury. Again, if you look at the same thing by age, you'll see that you've got a significant difference in what is happening to these individuals for muscle mass anywhere in their body. Now, if we switch over to fat, this is similar to the other slide. The dotted slide line that you see is the normal, and total body fat in the upper left corner. You could see the dramatic increase, and think about the medical consequences of that. And that continues whether it's the arm, the trunk, or the leg, and going around that same chart. And the same kind of comparison what's happening. You should see as you get older, you see a greater increase in fat tissue mass in these patients, and think about that for an impact on diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and other morbidities. I can spend a lot more time on that, but I'm going to focus a little more on the history of what's been done. This isn't a new concept to try to come up with ways to allow people to walk, but it's a very desirable thing to do, whether it's physiological, psychological, or just functional. If you look, the number of people I've become friendly with, one in particular, it's Sergeant Teresa Hannigan, I know. She has one of these systems, and she tells me about how it changed her life, and two pieces of it that really stuck with me. She lives two doors down from her mother, but she couldn't get a ramp into her mother's house. So she can't go to her mother's house unless someone's there to pick her up and carry her up the stairs, those 2 steps. The other one she talks about, she's from a family of 16 people. And she did this recently in a session with a couple of people, notably President Obama was one of them. And she said, look, how do you hug someone? And he told her, I put my arms around him, I give him a hug. And she said, that's what I used to do with my mother. But when I'm in a wheelchair, they bend over and they barely touch me. I lost human contact. Now that I could stand there, I can hug someone. So the reason President Obama reached over and hugged her was a result of that conversation he had with her. What does this cause? What does this do to a wheelchair user? And I've become incredibly cognizant of this, even in particular with Dr. Gopher, who I regard as a remarkable man. The number of times I've been places with him where he is marginalized because he's in a chair, he can't stand eye to people, he gets stuck in corners, and people don't intentionally not include him, but it happens. But if you look at things, what happens to self-esteem when you're cut off like that? What happens to mobility? Daily struggle of just living. A lot of what you start to get out of these types of technologies and dreams is where you're changing the situation for the individual instead of having to change the environment. Yes, in the United States and Canada and a good part of Israel, we have relatively good access for disability. But most of Europe does not, a lot of places. You'd be surprised how many places they just can't get up 2 steps or get up a curb or fit through a door or go into a bathroom. Here's some of the pictures, but what are they looking for? What are, if you ask the wheelchair users, what would they like? Inclusion, like we all would. Quality of life, more independence, and more ability to be upright. There's been a lot of effort over the years. I think you saw Locomat in one of the centers down there before. If you look at these pictures, upper left corner is a body weight supported treadmill device. The one in the middle is electrical stimulation. All of these were different things that were built in a way to give exercise and movement. And they all worked rather well. They're good devices. In paraplegia, specifically, there are metal braces that you see like this picture, RGOs, resistive gait orthosis devices, and there's been electrical stimulation. All of these allowed at least a measure of standing and walking, but none of them were functional to the point of being able to use them in daily life. Currently, most people rely on a wheelchair, or they rely on a standing wheelchair, or they rely on a standing device that they just stay in for some period of time. The data for people who use these is pretty good. It shows that some of these secondary medical consequences are lessened greatly when you use any of the things I've just shown you. Particularly looking at cardiovascular, muscle, and improvements in just well-being. And you can stand and talk with these groups. But here's one of the biggest challenges. They're in rehab centers. Many countries only reimburse a number of sessions, whether it's 20, 30, 50. If you can't go to the rehab center, you lose it. And generally, many of the programs and people we've had in our study so far, their biggest complaint is at the end of the study, they had to end the study. We had the most incredible compliance I've ever seen in a clinical study. We did not have anybody not show up for everything we've done because the benefits are lost if they can't keep using it. And the mission of Dr. Gopher, of us, and any other company I think in this space is not something for the hospital, but something that you can take home and live in your everyday life. And it's got to be functional, and that's harder to do. The idea, you see some great pictures here in the upper left, something from 1960, a little on the big side. These were all things that were built for augmentation. Some work so-so, some don't work great. But the Hulk in the bottom third one over there, that is to allow a soldier to carry 200 pounds of weight for a longer period of time. All of these may be future other ways you see exoskeleton used. Maybe you can run a marathon faster with it, but that's not our purpose. Ours is medical. If you look at medical, you can go back to 1948 in Moscow, as there were some drawings and efforts. Probably the first one that really was functional was the one in Yugoslavia in 1975. But none of these had the ability to be user-controlled, used at home, and work all day. So the dream has been there for a long time. What has emerged in the last few years, as technology's gotten better, there are about 4 or 5 companies, all at varying states. One out of the United States, out of Berkeley, California, the Rewalk out of Israel, the Rex out of New Zealand, one out of Iran without a name, and one out of really Nashville, Tennessee, or Vanderbilt University. Rewalk was the first of these and has a pretty good lead on what we're doing with them now. But these are all good technologies that help patients in different ways. I want to play this short segment with Dr. Gopher, if I can get it to work. Here we go. So you can see him.
I graduated from Technion, my BSc, in 1975. Following that, I went to the Army and worked as an engineer most of my life. So when I got in this situation myself of using the wheelchair, confined to wheelchair, in 1997, then I looked around and I was kind of wondering how come the wheelchair would be the only solution. 2001, I founded Argo Medical Technologies, and I entered the Technion Seed incubator, and they developed the engineering device that enables a person that is completely paralyzed waist down and completely confined to wheelchair to walk. Climb stairs, slopes, drive. It shifts the person from a wheelchair user status to a crutch user status, which is a whole difference. Real clinical trials have been completed in Shiba Medical Center August 2008 in a great success. And now we have clinical studies in most rehab hospitals in Philadelphia. And the one problem that we have, people don't want to leave the clinical trials.
So Dr. Gopher's a remarkable man. He would like to have joined you here, but at this point, at least, he's still home working on the quadriplegic device. Now, in our engineering team, which is why most of our clinical work now is centered in Europe and the United States, the design considerations that had to go in here. It was something that could be used all day, not something that's just a 1-hour session in the lab. You have to look at a lot of things. I won't cover everything in there, but if you look at a simulation of user capabilities, the second bullet there, if you're going for a walk with someone, obstacles, sometimes people, sometimes dogs, sometimes kids, sometimes toys, get in your way. You have to be able to walk around them. You have to be able to apply judgment. Do I go out in the weather? Do I, if it's raining, do I go in? Sometimes you just need to stop. A car's coming down the highway, the light might be red, but they may not be stopping. You have to have those capabilities for the user. The intent here was for the user to have complete control of the device, and I'll try to describe that in a minute, why they have complete control of the device. Just like any one of you wanting to stand up from your chair or walk out this door, these individuals can do it now with no limitations. What we tried to do really was also get something that had a natural gait. And a lot of work was done to match as close as you could to a normal walking pattern, because we believe that has the biggest health benefits. A lot of other design considerations. There's an extensive amount with safety. That's both regulatory and morally required for what we're doing. But crutches, we didn't use electrical stimulation because of the fatigue issue, and the device can handle its own weight. If you look at the device, here's a picture of Agnes. She's in Philadelphia in the United States. I'll show you the motor in just a minute on the inside, but basically the legs and hips have motors on each side, but behind her left elbow, you see a tilt sensor. And when Agnes wants to move, Agnes moves her upper body just enough. So she has an ability to balance. And when she wants to lean more right or turn more left or right, she leans. And she does it with her upper body. But Agnes was a gymnast. She's completely paralyzed. Her level is a T10, and she walks quite well. She can walk by several methods. There's a remote control she wears on her wristband, and you just push a button. You can see in the stand mode is the one lit up in the middle. She pushes the button to go to the right mode. And she uses the crutches for safety and for a little bit of sensing. I mean, she can't feel the ground except what the crutches are doing, so if the ground is soft, if the grass is too long, she can feel it with the crutches. The functional diagram, I'll save that for questions if anybody really wants to get into the details of how it works. But the key elements, it's a combination of software and hardware. The reason this didn't work in 1948, the motors aren't new, the gears aren't new. We could build those for a lot of years. The sensor technologies and the software capacity is really what's made a difference that allows this to work. This is what the inside motor and gear looks like. We didn't create a new one. This motor came right out of a Swiss motor manufacturer. Has been making them forever, and the gear came out of Germany. We've taken pieces from all over the world to build this product. The software is primarily from Israel. Now, we spent a lot of time in the planning and analysis with the gait labs. How do we manage to have the strike of the foot and the ankles to mimic as close as we could human walking? And we've done that with a lot of measurements. And this, in the software setting, we can set the ankle, knee, hip, and tilt angles for any one individual, tall or short, long leg, short leg. That allows us to function in the most natural way for each individual. And it's pretty easily done by the PT lab. There's a lot of other things we do on safety. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. If a person doesn't start moving, it just goes into a wait mode. And then they either have to push the button again, and they can push either the button on the watch, or they can actually have a button on the side of their hands. And then there's a lot of prevention things in here, which are primarily aimed at safety. So if current goes too high, it'll slow down. A lot of the safety is, BIT is built-in testing, but a lot of it's sensors, alarms, and warnings. So when the individual wants to walk, there's a beep, a buzzer, and a little bit of motion that they can see with the light. This allows them what they've got to do. Now we have two batteries, there's a main and a backup, and those make a big difference for what we're trying to do, and several fall protection. And simply fall protection is, if it senses something is wrong, the device will slowly, using the gears, go back to a sitting mode. If they're near a chair, they'll sit back in it. If they're where they're going to fall, they can put the crutches below them, and the distance they'll be falling will be greatly limited. So we've had no injuries, fortunately, in the 200 or so used. I want to give you a picture of it walking. You saw the short video a minute ago, but basically you can see Roddy. This is an Israeli soldier shot in the conflict 3 times in the stomach, paralyzed from T8 and below. Roddy does very well. He did a 10K in Israel just recently. Did it in 4 hours and about 10 minutes, which is a pretty good time. Hot day that particular day. But you can see what he's doing. He pushes the button. When he wants to stand up, he's put the hands below him, and he's just tilted his shoulders enough where it stands for him. Same thing in walking, and we'll just play a video. It's probably an easier way to show that. There we go. Now this is, I think, in New York, and really there's 3 elements here. You see him standing, and no one's around to help him, and that's true of all of our users. It is now being used at home in Europe and in Israel, hopefully in the States before too long. But look at the gait pattern of his walking pattern. This is the most natural of all. I think one of the key things about our company and about this effort out of Israel in particular with Dr. Gopher is how hard we've worked to bring paralyzed individuals into the company. We're hiring them wherever we can because they help us get it right. And what I think we've done better than any of the other companies, and this is really Dr. Gopher because he understands it. The man was a remarkable inventor, then he became injured. And he's using both the skills now, his inventive skills as well. Now, why can use this all day compared to other things? This chart on the left is heart rate, on the right is the calorie burn. And the measurements on here are generally of both rewalkers and normal people. For any of you sitting in the room, you should have a heart rate, somewhere around 62, 65, something like that. What we've measured in these individuals in the energy requirements in the way this system has been designed is that we have no unusual energy requirements. You can use this all day. The people who have bought this and taken it home have varied. Some of them use it at work. And one of the guys I know, he just leaves it at his office. He takes his wheelchair to work. It's easier, it's faster to go in the wheelchair, but he gets to work, he puts on a suit, he walks around all day, he does his meetings. At the end of the day, he takes it off, unplugs it. He's thinking about buying a second one to have at home, but it's good to see that use. I see others that use it primarily for social. I can think of Claire Lomas, who did the London Marathon in the suit. And Claire, she has a 2-year-old daughter, and her daughter gets in the way, and she could pick her up in a wheelchair. So at home, she tends to use it, but she always goes out in the evening wearing her suit when she's going anywhere. She likes to be in that kind of social situation, or if she's in a store or something like that. And these measurements are just simply, they show that the energy level's there. We've got people that can use it all day. If you look at some of the value of this, the main thing is what it gives them in the health side, probably, when I'm working with the reimbursement side. But you can see a picture of Claire in the upper left at the Paralympics, and down below at the London Marathon. Here's Agnes, and this is a bigger set of stairs than we necessarily really want them going on all the time, but they can. Roddy is a soldier I mentioned before. I think my favorite thing about watching him in the community, everybody used to pay a lot of attention to him. When he was out walking around, they'd turn and look. They don't do that anymore. He's just normal. He's just a part of the community now. You walk down the street and, oh yeah, there's Roddy. There's nothing unusual, and he's able to do just about anything in it, from getting ice cream to having a beer at lunch. We've done well on getting very good publicity on the broad side of this, and this helps with awareness more than anything else, and certainly President Obama and the Prime Minister were wonderful with that. I won't have as much time to hit all of the clinical, but we focused on a safety study, and we focused on long-term benefits. And on the safety study, I mean, the most important element here is, right here. Our entire adverse events were 4, and they were small abrasions like that, which are generally dealt with by padding. We had no falls, we had no injuries that would fall into the significant adverse event category, which is important from a regulatory point of view. More importantly, on the medical benefit side, this is being funded independently by the United States Veterans Administration. We are completely independent of it, but we're measuring what's happening to lean tissue, fat tissue, bowel function, and walking speed. And entirely favorable results. These are interim results, but I'm going to skip through most because of time, but I'm going to hit this one in particular because I think I hear the most. We asked them 3 or 4 questions. How long does it take you to go to the bathroom each day? That's the 3rd column. How often do you go? What are the stools like? And what's happened to your medication? And this is similar whether we look at insulin, pain medication, or other things in their life. I'm just using this as an example of the one that they cite the most. Look at patient 6, the middle line. The amount of time on a daily average is cut in half. The frequency per week has gone from 2 to 3 to 3.4. The stool sale, 1 is rock hard, 7 is liquid, 4 is what you want. They're all at about 4 now these days, and they've stopped all these medications. This is a big difference on their daily routine, even though we can also show a lot of other benefits in it as well. The last thing I'd put up on this is just a comment, again, unsolicited, to an extent what we did. We don't have any direct association with Stephen Hawking, but he is coming to Israel again in June, and he's paid a lot of attention to this, both for personal reasons, but I think also for what this can mean. When we look at the number of people that are injured on a worldwide basis, whether it's our technology or one of the other companies, it's something that has great medical application as well as society applications. So with that, I'll turn over for questions.